I first came to what was then the FWBO, before Triratna, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have Google. We didn't even have mobile phones. Yes, I'm that old. What I'd like to do tonight is tell you a little bit about what I was like before I came across our order, what happened, and what I'm up to today. So a little bit about what I used to be like before. And I need to go back a little bit to 1974. Now, I'm aware some of you listening tonight weren't even born then, but that's okay. I was, and it was a year that I got sober. I was a raging alcoholic, and I found sobriety through Alcoholics Anonymous. And the reason why I mention that is twofold. One, it helped shape my order name that was given to me by Buddhist some years later, but also it introduced me to a program of recovery based on a set of steps which mirror pretty closely our precepts. It taught me that I need to meditate on a daily basis, which sounds familiar also. It also introduced me to a sense of fellowship, which correlates with our Sangha. And it also introduced me to the concept of being able to share my recovery with other people, which follows on to our Kalyana Mitra system or preceptorship in the order. So 1974, jump forward a little bit, 1980, an important part of my life, I met and married Phil. Phil had 3 children at that stage, 13, 10 and a 7-year-old. So instantly I had a family, an instant family, just add water. Jump forward to 1995, I was looking to find some answers to the big questions in life. My life had a degree of existential angst. I wanted to know how things work. I wanted to know what my place in the world was. I wanted to know what all of us were here for. At the CAE, the Council of Adult Education in Melbourne, a chap called Gurkha Vajra was running a 6-week course on Buddhism, traditional Buddhism. And I hadn't found anywhere up to that point where I could meet with what I called other Buddhists, because I called myself a Buddhist, although I didn't really know what that meant. So the first night sitting at this course, Gurkha Vajra started talking about the Buddha's foresights. And I started to realise here were some of the answers to the questions I'd had for decades. Answers to some of the questions. The mere fact that he talked about there was suffering and also there was a cause of suffering, but more importantly, there was a cessation of suffering and a path leading out of that suffering, struck me very deeply. I then understood on an emotional level, certainly not intellectually, but an emotional level, why I called myself a Buddhist. I'd seen a picture when I was a little kid of these monks sitting up in the top of the hills in the Himalayas, in the snow, cross-legged, meditating. And I said, they're a Buddhist, I'm a Buddhist, not understanding what it meant. But here at this CAE course was a man with this funny name talking about the things I had been missing in my life. So the following week, of course, I came to the then FWBO Centre, and it was the old centre, and met Siladasa, I met Buddhadasa, I met Sangamati, and I met Maitrapala, I met Pano, I met Amritashrada. A lot of these people weren't ordained, of course, at that time. And I started to develop friendships, and I instantly felt like I was at home. This was where I needed to be. 20 odd years of meditating with other people who didn't understand my way of thinking, who couldn't understand why I was trying to work out the big problems in life. Here were people who understood what I was talking about. Here were people dealing with similar problems, similar situations. How do you fit into life? What is your purpose? Why was I saved? Why was I able to get sober all those years ago, and lots of other people and even other members of my own family couldn't get sober? Why was I the one who was able to? So I found it very important then to start developing some friendships. I was then living in Melbourne. In 1996, the following year, Banty came to Melbourne on his way to New Zealand to commemorate the stupa that was being built at Siddhartha there. And I met Banty at the men's community in Bishop Street. And I put these questions to him about, why am I here? What is my purpose in life? What can I do about making my life worthwhile? And he gave me some clues, and he said, well, maybe the first thing you might need to do is start taking yourself a little bit more softly, a bit more kindly. And it struck me as odd. There was this elderly gentleman sitting in the cold room at Bishop Street with a shawl over his knees, another shawl around his shoulders, and this cup of white milky tea in a cup sitting next to him, treating me with this such kindness, and he'd never met me before. So I started to think about that and decide, okay, I need to explore this Dharma further. So that year I became a Mitra. I also asked for ordination training, and the following January I was on my first ordination training retreat, which was held in New Zealand that year. Also, at that same time, Banty was in Siddhartha to commemorate the stupa, which had just been finished being built. So I got to meet him again and have a few talks with him and a few chats, which was quite good. Also at this time, after returning from that trip in New Zealand in February, we'd sold our house in Melbourne. So here we were. I'd built a house in Lakes Entrance. Our 3 children had all grown up and left home. So Phil and I moved to what was then our holiday house in Lakes Entrance and moved out of Melbourne. Now I mention that point for 2 reasons. One, I haven't lived in Melbourne since 1997. That's some years now. And also that Phil and I spent some really good quality time there. But I found that I was so far away from the centre, so far away from Sangha. I was doing trips down to Melbourne every fortnight or 3 weeks, because I was trying to do Mitra study in Lakes Entrance, reading through the notes, writing questions, driving to Melbourne every third or fourth week with a list of questions for Siladasa or Buddhadasa or Gayavajra from the Mitra study material, pounding them for answers, and then going back to Lakes Entrance and preparing for the next fortnight or 3 weeks. So I was doing it long distance, 4-hour drive each way. So 99 came and I decided, how much of my life am I going to commit to Buddhism? And if I'm going to commit to my life as a Buddhist, is the FWBO the area or the Buddhist society that I want to commit to? And I was fortunate enough at that time to have 6 months overseas, where I went to the US and visited all the centres there. I went to the UK, where I spent 4 months at Padmaloka, the men's ordination training retreat, working on site with Gayavajra, building some new quarters for the support staff, and worked with Buddhadasa, who spent some time there at them as well. I went up to Scotland to the retreat centres up there, and I went across to Europe and visited Germany, Holland, France, Italy, and just had a closer look at what the order was like outside of Melbourne, just to see if it was just as good. And it was. And I came back with this burning desire. This is where I need to be, in this order. So I applied myself over the next year or so. And in January 2001, a major change happened. I was invited to be ordained at that stage at Vijayaloka, which some of you have been to in Sydney. And I happened to be lucky enough to be the first Australian ordained on Aussie soil on a 2-week retreat during a GFR retreat. But fortunately also, a couple of months later, I was able to go to Spain, and I also did the 4 months retreat at Gayaloka. So I suppose in a sense I got ordained twice. Once in Sydney with my family and friends there, and then again 4 months retreat at Gayaloka in Spain. So that was an important part of my life, but it also meant there were some changes taking place as well. My sense of Sangha when I returned from Spain was missing. It was too far back to Melbourne. I found I also enjoyed the idea of living a more solitary life. I enjoyed the quietness and the peace. But at the same time, a big mistake was being made in my life, a blind spot. And that was my communication and my relationship with then my wife, Phil. And it unfortunately led to me making a very bad decision, what I call a big mistake. I separated from Phil and we got divorced the next year. And it was a very painful time for not just me, but for Phil and for our children and the people around us. So it's just to let you know that all good things don't just happen once you become an order member. It was a blind spot. It was a part of my life where I made a big mistake. A little bit later on, I'll fill you in on how that has eventuated and what's happened since. But I need to mention it was a big mistake and I've been trying to make amends ever since. So part of being divorced, Phil stayed at Lakes Entrance and I moved out. And a friend of mine had an olive grove down here in Berrigurra, 2 hours west of Melbourne. And I had a caravan there. So I moved into this caravan. So I spent 3 years living in a caravan. No electricity, no running water, but a dam a couple hundred metres away. No heating apart from a gas stove. But I was able to get on with meditation. I was able to get on with contemplation and reflection. And I was able to try and sort out some of the mess I'd made with my family through the divorce. So 3 years later, I found I was starting to able to bring some sort of resolution towards that by making amends. So 2005 to 2015, my involvement with the MBC, the Melbourne Buddhist Centre, I got back onto the management committee. I was starting to run courses again, Buddhism and meditation courses. I was starting to support and lead courses, and I also became the Mitra convener. So I was quite actively engaged. And I mentioned that this is all from living 2 hours away from Melbourne. Also at this time, I found that for me, the centre was an important part of my life, an important part of me trying to carry the message of the Dharma. But I also found there were other avenues that I could express that as well. I spent a fair bit of time travelling up to Sydney to Vijayaloka and supporting retreats. And at that stage, the women who were living there. I also felt a debt I owed to the Council of Adult Education in Melbourne, where I first came and was exposed to the FWBO, Sri Ratna, back in 95. So I started running 6-week meditation courses at the CAE in Melbourne. And I did this for 6 years, 4 courses a year for 6 years. And I found that was quite rewarding. It was not people who'd come to the centre, but people, just general people coming in off the street, or people who are looking for something other than what they had in their lives. Around this time also, I got involved with RMIT, the welfare program that they were running, the degree courses. They needed someone to teach mindfulness to the people who are coming in to do their diploma courses in welfare. So I was able to become a facilitator there, and I worked for 3 years also taking classes at RMIT, but also bringing day classes into the centre then at Pitt Street. So we had full day sessions, and I had 30 to 40 students at a time. And also around that time, I was involved with some of the schools in the Moreland area. I did a few courses with Dante Chitta and some with Regia May around that time as well. So I was pretty active in trying to spread the Dharma, not just at the MBC, but in other avenues as well. 2009, another big change happened in my life. My good friend, my dear friend, Sanjiva, who had moved to Port Fairy, opened up the Port Fairy Buddhist community. And he was the only order member trying to lead classes on a weekly basis. So on a monthly basis, I'd come in and run a workshop for him, for the people. So I got to be part of the Port Fairy Sangha. And we also, over those next few years, ran 2 weekend retreats a year. So people were being exposed to the Dharma and being encouraged also to come down to the Melbourne Centre or go on retreats in Sydney and spread out to the wider Sri Ratna community. Also in 2012, my relationship with Phil, the lady that I made the mistake of divorcing back in 2002, because of our children, who then also had children of their own, we'd spent a lot of time in each other's company in between. And we came to an understanding where we're able to decide to become partners again. So this wonderful lady had forgiven me and allowed me back into her life. And I'm forever grateful for that. Yes, I am emotional. It was an important stuff for me. It started to put back the joy into the metta practice. It started to put back into my life the joy of being able to be with my family in a more relaxed state. But part of the condition of Phil and I getting back together again was that I'd already moved into a house I'd built in Berrigara. So what we decided was I'd spend half my time in Berrigara and half my time in Lakes Entrance. It was a compromise that enabled me to be able to still be in touch with the Melbourne Centre, 2 hours away, which is close to do in the day and back. 2 hours to Port Fairy, where my continuing engagement was important, but also give me a few weeks each month to be in Lakes Centre and spend time with Phil. So that was in 2012. Also that year, I was privileged to become a preceptor. Some of you understand what a preceptor is. It's someone who's a mentor, in a sense, who helps and guides someone who's training for ordination and then leads them through the training process and then actually brings them into the order. So I was privileged to do that. And in 2014, I ordained Nichidana into the order. And he's a New Zealand man and connected to Siddhartha, the retreat centre there. So I was able to ordain him at the stupa that Banty had placed Dardo's ashes in New Zealand, at Thames, up in the valley, and ordain Nichidana at that site. So that was really important. So by this stage, we're getting up to 2015. I turned the ripe old age of 65. 65. And I thought, okay, time to start winding down a little bit. I am a shy person by nature. I find it not easy talking in front of a group of people. I do find it quite difficult communicating on a written level. Most of my thinking is done visually, not with words. Some of you will identify with that. Some of you will find that confusing. But I think visually. So I decided to use the time I had left on this earth. How long, I don't know that is. So this was 5 years ago. So when I'm at Lakes Entrance, I've conducted a few meditation courses with local people, mainly through a yoga group. I've also led some study down in Lakes Entrance. Last year we did Mitra Bandhu's book, Life with Full Attention. So we did a 10-week course on that. I also look after some chooks and enjoy their company. we've got 5 acres of garden, so there's plenty of gardening to keep me busy. I'm also involved with those people who are relatives or friends of people who have a problem with alcoholism and are trying to learn to live with or having lived with someone with a problem of alcoholism. So I'm involved with a fellowship, communicating and sharing experiences and strengths and hopes with those people on a weekly basis. And also as part of my half and half in Berrigurra, those who've been down here, and quite a few of you have, we've got 3 acres of gardens down here, so there's a lot of gardening to be done here as well. I also, when I'm here, have a lot of solitary time for reflection, meditation, and contemplation. And I found myself this afternoon just sitting out on the front veranda here. I was watching a whole lot of silver eye honey eaters in the bird bath having a bath. And there was about a dozen sitting around this bowl. And one would jump in and he'd have a splash, jump back on the edge, then the next one would jump in. And I was probably, I don't know, enthralled by just the beauty and the nature of this simple thing, these birds having a bath. That's what my life is like these days. It's quiet and right down. So when I'm at Berrigurra, I'm here on my own 99% of the time. And I've got that opportunity to have that contemplation and reflection time. And also, I'm close to the Port Fairy Sangha. I'm only 2 hours away. So for a country person, 2 hours is close. For a city person, that's a long travel. But for a country person, 2 hours is close. So my good friend, Sangamati at Port Fairy, we catch up every 2 or 3 weeks when I'm down here. And I also monthly try to get to the Port Fairy meditation night. I've also run some retreats recently. The end of last year, we did a retreat in the Hall's Gap in the Grampians, looking at reviewing Mitra Bandhu's book, Living with Full Attention, from the people who completed that course before. And the other thing that's happened to me these days too, over the last couple of years now, last 5 years, I've spent at least a month each year in Bali. The first year I went with family, with Phil and one of our daughters and her partner, and a granddaughter came, and there was a whole herd of us. But the next year I went back and I found a quiet little motel on an isolated local beach where I had a unit where I could be on my own and not have to engage with other people. And I spent a month in isolation almost, on solitary. And each year I've gone back and done that since. This year I was due to be there in June for a month. That got cancelled. I changed that to October this month. That's also been cancelled. So this year I haven't been to Bali, and I've developed some friends over there, and I not only miss them as Sangha friends, but I also aware that they're in a more dire situation than we are here. It's difficult here with the COVID situation, but there are other places around the world that are doing it a lot tougher than us. So my friends over there, I really do feel for them. So in the last couple of minutes of my 30 minutes, I'd like to just mention a couple of friendships that I've really developed, and there's been a two-way communication with and time spent with since meeting the FWBO. One of them is Guyavadra, who taught me my first CAE course, who I spent 4 months Padnaloka, in the UK, working on the building site with, and also time with in New Zealand. A very friendly man, a real man's man, a builder by trade. And I also like to mention Buddhist. He's been a kind, constant, friendly, openly engaging friend since I first came to the FWBO back in '95. Our friendship has continued. He ordained me in New Zealand at at Vijayaloka, all my lokas, mixing up my lokas, at Vijayaloka, and gave me the name Sanjiva, and that means survivor, the quick, as in alive. He was aware of my past alcoholism and the struggles and the times that I went through and got through that and stayed sober and have been sober ever since my first meeting in 1974. He's also been aware of my struggles, trying to put those demons of existential angst to rest. And when I was ordained, he gave me the name Sanjiva, survivor. And even to this day, Buddhist is one of the regular visitors at Berrigara here, but also at Lakes Entrance. He quite often comes in and stays. So I appreciate his friendship. I'll also like to mention Sangamati, who I've mentioned a little bit about. He's a wonderful man. He's done so much for the Dharma, but he's just a kind, sweet, gentle friend who I just enjoy just being in his company. And if you know someone like that, you just like being in their company. You don't have to be doing anything, but just in their company. I really like him, love him. And I also like to mention a friend who's not in the fellowship, who's not in our Sangha, but I've known since moving to Lakes Entrance 35 years ago, John the fisherman. This was a very rough, gruff, tough shark fisherman who'd go out for weeks at a time, out in the oceans, out in the big seas, chasing these fish and bringing them back into shore. We've developed a friendship over these years that's really important to me, and it gives me a sense of balance in my life where I'm able to see someone who's not in our Sangha grow and change. And just before I came down here a couple of days ago, we were taking some cuttings of some lavender bushes in the backyard at Lakes Entrance. And here's John, this wild fisherman who's mellowed into this sweet, kind, friendly man with his secateurs and his big, thick fingers, cutting these little pieces of lavender and putting them gently into the seed mix. And he's lovingly caring for these plants. He waters them daily and he moves them around so they get a little bit of sun. His life is changing dramatically. And it's beautiful to be able to be part of someone like that's life and seeing the changes. So there's some of the friendships I've developed. Because Kalyana Mitrata is really important. The Buddha said spiritual friendship is the whole of the spiritual life. So friendships are really important, and it's what's kept me going. So I appreciate your time allowing me to be here tonight to share with you. I hope it's given some of you who know me a bit more understanding, and those who have never met me before, an understanding a little bit maybe that there are all different kinds that make up the order, and we don't all become saints or Buddhas just because we become ordained. We can still make mistakes, but we can also try to make amends for those mistakes too. So thank you, Apida, for allowing me to be here tonight.